background behind the Empire State Building that you see in the foreground. Those two towers no longer stand after a terrorist attack this morning. NBC's Pat Dawson is close to the scene of that attack. Pat? Pat,
Matt,
can you hear me?
if we are, yes, I can, Matt. If there is a war against terrorism that started, rather ongoing right now, it started here at about 8:45 this morning. As you described, a big hole in the skyline at the southern end, the southern tip of Manhattan Island, where the two World Trade Center towers have stood for the last 25 years, 110 stories high. They are no longer there. Just moments ago, I spoke to the chief of safety for the New York City Fire Department, who was obviously one of the first people here on the scene after those two planes were crashed into the side, we assume, of the World Trade Center towers, which used to be behind me over there. Chief Albert Turry told me that he was here just literally 10 or 15 minutes after the events that took place this morning. That is the first crash. He said that at one point he had roughly 10 alarms. That would equate to roughly 200 to 225 New York City firefighters who were in the building. This was after the crash, trying to rescue civilians who were in there. Now, earlier this morning on the Today Show, we spoke to the director of the World Trade Center. He said that at that hour of the morning, you could have upwards of 10,000 people in each of those towers. That would be 20,000 people total in each tower. The chief of safety, as I said, chief safety of the Fire Department of New York City, told me that shortly after 9 o'clock, he had roughly 10 alarms, roughly 200 men in the building trying to effect rescues of some of those civilians who were in there, and that basically he received word of the possibility of a secondary device, that is another bomb going off. He tried to get his men out as quickly as he could, but he said that there was another explosion which took place, and then an hour after the first hit here, with the first crash that took place, he said, there was another explosion that took place in one of the towers here. So obviously, according to his theory, he thinks that there were actually devices that were planted in the building. One of the secondary devices he thinks that took place after the initial impact was, he thinks, may have been on the plane that crashed into one of the towers. The second device he thinks, he speculates, was probably planted in the building. So that's what we have been told by Albert Turry, who is the chief of safety for the New York City Fire Department. He told me that just moments ago. Now, we are continuing to hear explosions. Here downtown, and what we've been told by some of the fire officials is that there are some gas lines that occasionally are exploding down there, because obviously, as you can imagine, there are a lot of open gas lines down in the southern part of Manhattan where the World Trade Center towers used to be. As far as the situation right here, basically what we have are hundreds of New York City firefighters and other New York City rescue units who are massed here. There is a cordon just down there. We are not sure, to be honest, if some rescue workers have tried to go beyond that point as yet. When we spoke to the head of the Port Authority Police, that would be the organization that is in charge of the World Trade Center building itself, the Port Authority Police chief told us that they were at that point, about, I'd say 40 minutes ago, about to make a decision on whether or not it was safe to send emergency workers back in there. But the bottom line is that, according to the chief of safety of the New York City Fire Department, he says that he probably lost a great many men in those secondary explosions, and he said that there were literally hundreds, if not thousands, of people in those two towers when the explosions took place. He said everything above the 60th floor was extremely difficult to get to, as you can imagine.
Pat Dawson.
Back to you.
Pat Dawson, thanks very much. We have some videotape, I understand, that we're going to show you from the West Bank. These are Palestinian celebrations in the wake of Tuesday's terror attacks in the United States. Apparently, Palestinians took to the street chanting, "God is great." People were throwing candy, distributing candy to passersby. The U.S. government obviously has become increasingly unpopular, particularly in the West Bank and Gaza Strip, because Palestinians feel that the U.S. government has sided with Israel. One man, Nawal Abdel Fattah, wearing a long black dress, threw sweets in the air, saying, actually that's a woman, pardon me, saying she was happy because, quote, America is the head of the snake. America always stands by Israel in its war against us. Meanwhile, Yasser Arafat emerged to speak with reporters ahead of the Palestinian Liberation Organization. He said, "We are completely shocked. It's unbelievable. We completely condemn this very dangerous attack, and I convey my condolences to the American people, to the American president, and to the American administration, not only in my name, but on behalf of the Palestinian people."
And this comes on a day, Katie, in which obviously there's been a steady deterioration of the situation in the Middle East, but Shimon Peres was to meet today with Yasser Arafat in the West Bank. There has been some criticism of the Bush administration for not getting more involved in the peacemaking efforts in the Middle East in the past few weeks from within the Republican Party as well.
Because it has gotten increasingly volatile.
It has. There's been a steady escalation of violence, incursions by Israelis into Palestinian towns and declaring martial law and then pulling back. And everyone thought that the bomb was ticking in the Middle East. No one expected anything of these kinds of consequences to be visited upon this country in this horrific way that we have been witness to today. It is one more example, as we have been saying this morning, of events in far-off places that have such an enormous impact here, because the United States is, in the eyes of so many people who are opposed to our system of government and our alliances, is the devil incarnate. And today this is a very sophisticated, very cold-blooded, very widespread attack carried out with the most chilling kind of efficiency on several of the great nerve centers of our system of government and our way of life.
And we're talking about perhaps thousands of casualties. What's one thing that's very frustrating about reporting this story is we know that many, many people were inevitably very seriously hurt or killed in these explosions. We have 4 aircraft full of people, obviously, that were involved in these incidents, and an untold number of people who were in the World Trade Center at the time, in the surrounding area, and of course those individuals at the Pentagon as well.
And you can only hope that in the time between the actual collision, the planes hitting the towers, and the time it took for those buildings to collapse, that large numbers of people were able to get down the stairs. You'd have to assume that power in the building was probably disrupted. Elevators may not have been usable, that they were able to get down smoke-filled stairways to safety before both of those towers collapsed.
And as Pat Dawson just said, though, from the 60th floor up, it was very, very, very difficult. And there are 110 floors in the Twin Towers each in the World Trade Center. So you're talking about 50 floors, if his estimate is correct, of people. Now, the first explosion did occur at 8:42 in the morning. Some people might not have been at work yet, but many people here in New York, a workaholic town, get to work early, particularly those who are watching the markets, the overseas markets, and this is the financial center of the United States and, of course, of New York City as well.
Yeah, we have hesitated to use specific numbers, but Mayor Giuliani is saying it's a horrendous number of lives lost, and it could be in the thousands.
We want to go now to Ray Kelly, who's a former police commissioner here in New York City. Mr. Kelly, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Obviously, after the terrorist attack in 1993 on the World Trade Center, security was beefed up, but there's nothing that could have been done to prevent this kind of an attack, it seems.
No, it appears that nothing could be done, and of course, events in 1993 pale in comparison to this. This is a horrific event. As the mayor said, it appears to be thousands of casualties. And New York City emergency services, I believe, are the best in the world. But something like this, of course, could overwhelm any emergency service. But I think there is, I guess, some consolation to say that they are the best. And unfortunately, we don't know how many of them have been injured or perhaps killed.
Let me ask you a question about that, Ray. Is it true that the Center for New York Emergency is housed at the World Trade Center?
Yes, that is true. It was shifted there 2 years ago. It was up on the one of the, I think about the 7th or 8th floor in one of those buildings. And again, in hindsight, perhaps that shouldn't have been done, but it was a state-of-the-art facility, no question about it.
Well, tell me a little bit more about that facility, if you could, Ray. I mean, what specifically is it designed to do?
It's designed to coordinate. You have 40,000 police officers. You have a fire department with the emergency service, EMS component of about 15,000 people. It the purpose of that facility was to coordinate activities in the event of emergencies. And again, it had state-of-the-art communications equipment. And it's something that it's just unfortunate as to where it was located. But there are temporary headquarters. New York City has several of them, and mobile temporary headquarters that I'm sure they're operating out of now.
At the same time, it must be fairly chaotic without the use of that center to coordinate the efforts.
Well, I guess everything is chaotic right now, but the emergency vehicles, I think New York City has a lot of major events, and they coordinate most of those events outside of that center. That center has kind of an oversight responsibility for a lot of the events. The coordination is done on the scene. So they practice doing that
and Ray,
on a
I mean,
regular basis.
obviously the problem here is not only do police officers and law enforcement and rescue people have to respond to what's happened at the World Trade Center, but also a large number have to fan out to make sure that nothing occurs at other landmark buildings throughout the city.
That's true, and of course services have to be provided throughout the city. The normal police and fire services, the rest of the city, 320 square miles, have to be covered by emergency services. So it is indeed a tremendous challenge.
Ray, you've been in the middle of these kinds of episodes when you were the police commissioner in '93 during the attack. Your whole life has been dedicated to law enforcement and national security matters. But aren't you stunned by the magnitude of this attack and the complete surprise of it all?
Yes, and the complexity of it. I think we've relied for years on the relative lack of sophistication on the part of terrorist organizations. We've been very lucky, no question about it. We've had fairly good intelligence information, but then again, we knew nothing about the World Trade Center bombing before it happened. We had terrorists cross into our borders just before the millennium, December 14th of 1999. You can't predict these things. I am surprised, again, at the level of coordination and sophistication of these attacks.
Ray, what kind of game plan is in place? Obviously, following the bombing of the World Trade Center, officials really sat up and took notice and knew that this kind of attack, perhaps not of this magnitude, but another terrorist attack was possible. So what kind of game plan was put in place?
Well, there's tremendous reliance on intelligence gathering. Certainly the FBI and CIA work more closely now than ever in communicating with each other and gathering information with the NSA. The FBI has set up counterterrorism task forces throughout the country. There's now, I believe, 23 of them. New York City was the first. And indeed, that was the entity that did the investigation of the World Trade Center bombing in 1993. There's a lot more awareness now than there was in 1993, quite frankly, but obviously didn't prevent a terrible tragedy like this.
All right. Well, Ray Kelly, former New York Police Commissioner. Mr. Kelly, thanks very much for talking with us this morning. We're going to go now to Washington, to Campbell Brown, who is across the street from the White House, which, as we mentioned, has been evacuated. Campbell, what's the latest?
Well, Katie, we're not actually sure at the moment if where exactly the president is right now. He was in Florida this morning. We understand that he was told about the situation while he was in a holding room at the Booker Elementary School, where he was scheduled to do a reading event. He was was informed by his national security advisor, Condoleezza Rice, by telephone while he was in that holding room of the first incident when the first plane crashed into the World Trade Center. He was actually reading to children when he heard about the second incident, and that was from Andy Card, his chief of staff, who whispered in the president's ear while he was reading to children. We are told by White House officials that he is planning to convene a national security meeting of all of his top advisors. We do know that National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice and other key officials are now meeting in the Situation Room at the White House. As we mentioned, the rest of the White House has been evacuated. Only key personnel are allowed there. That meeting began about 9:39, we're told, this morning. Everyone else, again, evacuated. One of the questions, Katie, that we're asking right now, given that no one's been informed where the president is, and this is, of course, deliberate, is whether or not the White House will decide to put him on the so-called doomsday plane. This is a special plane designed for the president in the event of a nuclear attack, and it's far more sophisticated than Air Force One. It has the absolute most advanced.
Maybe about 90 passengers on board this plane. Of course, we are waiting to hear more information about that. And as soon as something becomes available, we will definitely pass it along to you, David and Peggy.
Okay, Rick, thank you very much. We're back as well on WPXI, coverage for you live here of the situation in Pittsburgh. Of course, you've been watching network coverage of the horrific situation in New York and in Washington, and this has touched Pittsburgh. There is the crash scene. This is near Shanksville, Stony Creek Township, Somerset County, Lambertsville Road. There you see the crater, and there you can see, Peggy, just the tiniest bits of white debris, and there's really nothing left of that plane.
And the most chilling thing, Dave, is to hear of that 911 call that apparently came into a Westmoreland County 911 dispatcher from a passenger on that plane. That is chilling.
Oh, to say repeatedly, it's not a hoax, it's not a hoax. Believe me when I say this plane has been hijacked. United Flight number 93 out of Newark headed towards San Francisco, crashing in Somerset County. And we can only assume, we don't know for sure, we can only assume that this is somehow all connected to what's been going on in New York and in Washington, in literally America under attack. Again, a live picture there, a picture from the scene of the plane crash in western Pennsylvania. So yes, indeed, what's been going on the east coast of this country has had some effect where we live here.
Yeah, how unlikely to think that Pittsburgh would have a significant part in what happened this morning, which was so terribly troubling, and then it just escalated. It got worse. You know, when you thought it couldn't get worse, it would get worse. And that is what has left everyone so frightened. And today, as I was coming in for work, there was just an exodus from the city of Pittsburgh. The roads are clogged with people trying to get home to their families from downtown.
It's really nothing like we've ever seen before here. I think that's safe to say. And again, just a quick update on the plane crash here in our area. It was United 757. We don't know how many people are on board. We have to assume the worst given the pictures we've seen there and the accounts of the scene of a crater in the ground and very, very little in the way of debris. Rick Earl just telling us that the largest piece they found is about 5 feet long. There is again shots of New York as the unbelievably.
That's the second or the first tower that was hit first collapsing, but the second one to collapse.
Of the World Trade Center, both towers struck by 2 different aircraft this morning, and then because of the structural uneasiness of the buildings, they fell down completely. They're in downtown New York, lower Manhattan.
You look at that shot, it looks like a war scene.
It does.
There's nothing else you can compare it to. Rick Earl is back on the line with us. Rick, go ahead.
Yeah, Peggy, I understand you now have video of the scene. Again, that's huge crater with debris scattered all over the area. I did speak just a short time ago to some more eyewitnesses. Apparently several people saw this plane go down. I just talked to one eyewitness who said he was working here. It's his second day on the job at a salvage yard here, and he heard the plane, and he looked up, and he thought it was flying rather low, and then he watched it as it continued along the horizon right in front of him, and he said all of a sudden the plane just took a dive and apparently went down at about a 45-degree angle. The nose hit first. He said there was a huge explosion. Then he said there was a huge ball of fire and smoke billowing up from the area. He said he immediately contacted some other of his workers who were in the area. They heard the explosion as well and saw the fire, and then all of them went running down to the scene to see what they could see if they could help. In fact, and he said by the time they got there, he said there was virtually nothing left of that plane. He said in fact, a couple of people have told us that the biggest piece of debris they found down there was in fact about 5 feet long, and that was it. Everything else just debris scattered throughout the area, and of course that huge crater. But like you said, Peggy, the most chilling thing of all is that 911 call that apparently came in from the passenger on the plane. When I was told that earlier today, it's just chilling, Peggy. I can't describe it in any other words.
Yeah, it really is, Rick.
Yeah.
In an earlier report, you had mentioned that this was a strip mining area, and it's hard to really see too much. I see some woods around there, the crash site.
Right.
Maybe we can get another look at that. Were there any workers around there? I mean, are you aware of that?
Yeah, David, this is a very rural, remote area, and if there's any good thing to come out of this is the fact that this was not very populated, and the plane went down in a very remote, wooded, rural area near the strip mine. Apparently it hit near the strip mine and then careened a little ways into the I guess when it hit with the nose and then actually flipped over into the wooded area, which is adjacent. The trees are adjacent to the strip mine. But, you know, again, it's just a very remote area. I think the closest workers were probably, it looks like about a quarter mile away.
Okay.
There's also a farm nearby, but that still appears to be a quarter mile away as well. So this obviously a very rural, very remote area.
All right, Rick Earl there, who's on the scene on the phone with us, and this is Stony Creek Township, Shanksville, near Lambertsville Road. Go ahead, Rick, I'm sorry.
Yeah, David, it's about 3 miles outside of Shanksville. Shanksville is the largest municipality in this area. This is on Lambertsville Road in Stony Creek Township, Somerset County. And, you know, right now, as you would expect, there are dozens of police officers and emergency personnel here, and they've roped off the scene, and the FBI is down there processing it now. And again, Tom Spallone from the state police said we're treating this as a crime scene. So,
all right, thank you very much, Rick. We're going to go on now. As you know, the air traffic is at a standstill across the country, including at Pittsburgh International. In a little while, we are going to be talking to the spokesperson at Pittsburgh International. But right now, we want to take you to downtown Pittsburgh, where many people have been asked to leave their office buildings and go home. Some of those evacuations are mandatory, some just voluntary. We have Alan Jennings standing by downtown. Alan?
Peggy, let me show you what's going on here right now. Behind me, this is the U.S. Courthouse building and the post office. Inside are the offices of the Pittsburgh FBI, the federal judges, and of course the post office. About an hour or so ago, they ordered the evacuation of the building of all employees. As soon as we can, there's a Port Authority truck in the way. I want to show you the security measures that they've taken here. This building is on red alert. There are federal marshals circling the building with assault weapons. The state police are here to help them out. You can see the Port Authority police car and the officer. They've got the to make sure that only buses are using the busway today. A little bit earlier, and 1 block down the street, they evacuated the USX Tower. Let's go to that videotape to show you exactly what was going on there this morning. They made great efforts to get everybody out in a very orderly fashion. There was no panic, obviously, but hundreds of people to get out of that building. They did it as a precautionary measure because the USX Tower stands and looms over the city. It's a very large target. Had that ever been the case, but there has been, let me say, there has been no report that it was a target. It was only a precautionary measure. Some of the people that were evacuated talked to us about how they felt about this whole situation.
I felt kind of queasy in the stomach. I felt sick. You know, it's terrible. It's atrocity. It's the most horrible thing that I've ever heard.
It's just, it makes you feel uneasy as hell, to tell you the truth. I mean, you know, you don't think anything's going to happen, but you never think anything's happened to the World Trade Center either.
You can see here at the intersection of Grant and Liberty, the officer directing traffic. People are still trying to get out of the city. We had a number of buildings and people evacuated. However, some of the other services, some of the private businesses are still working. People are still in their offices, but a number of people in the larger buildings were sent home. That's the situation here downtown. Live at the U.S. Courthouse, Alan Jennings, Channel 11 News.
All right, Alan, thank you very much. And again, we're looking at the live pictures from the network above us there on your screen of still the plumes of smoke coming from the collapse of the 2 World Trade Center towers in downtown New York.
And we're going to go ahead and see the video of the Trade Center collapse, if they can roll that for us.
Unbelievable to watch. I mean,
even in still form, it's unbelievable. Look at that explosion. That was that second explosion. There's that plane coming in. This is about 18 minutes after the first explosion, and watch. Just shocking. Many people saw that second explosion live as they were watching coverage of the first explosion. The only good news in that is that they had 18 minutes to start evacuating that second tower, and it had been in the process of being evacuated. So hopefully one could, you know, assume that quite a few people got out, but then later both buildings collapsed. Emergency workers clearly were in those buildings trying to assist people who were trapped.
It's something like out of a movie, but it really happened.
It's horrifying.
And it is literally horrifying. And you understand, I know you felt this way, I did too, to hear the man from Alan Jennings this morning, it made him sick to his stomach. You get such an uneasy feeling, a feeling of you're not safe anywhere. And, you know, we have news of what happened here in Pittsburgh with a plane crash here, and it's scary stuff, there's no question.
And at some point we're going to have to, we're so busy dealing with what's continuing to unravel right now, but at some point we're going to have to talk about what do we tell our children.
Exactly.
Children are, some of them being let out of school, some of them will be coming home this afternoon, and this is pretty frightening stuff. For grown-ups,
yeah,
not to mention children.
It's about as bad as it gets. It is not unlike like a wartime attack on the United States. All right, Becky Thompson has some more information for us live in the newsroom. Becky?
David, I want to tell you about some closings and some changes now. Allegheny County has activated its Emergency Management Operations Center. We also want you to know that reportedly all military installations are operated under a DEFCON Charlie. Now, we're told that that's one of the highest levels of alert, which means that all military personnel on leave may be called into active duty, and that reserve units across the country are being put on standby. U.S. Airways says all its planes are accounted for. Now we're going to tell you about some college closings. The University of Pittsburgh is closed. Carnegie Mellon University. There are no classes at Duquesne University or the Mushroom Family Learning Center. Classes at Carlow College are closed. Westmoreland County Community College, Chatham College, Point Park College, the University of Phoenix off Campbell's Run Road, Community College of Beaver closed, Pittsburgh Filmmakers School, Butler County Community College, Community College of Allegheny County, California University of Pennsylvania is also closed. ICM School of Business, Geneva College. In Westmoreland County, all federal and state buildings are closed. The Kiski area schools, 2-hour early dismissal and no afternoon kindergarten. St. Gertrude in Vandergrift, 2-hour early dismissal. New Ken and Arnold School District, the students there are dismissed at noon and there is no after-school activities. In Allegheny County, the Allegheny County courts are closed. Gateway schools, parents can pick up children voluntarily. Evening activities are canceled. Plum Borough School District, open houses, practices, and all other activities are closed. We're going to give you more school closings when we come back.
Okay, thank you very much, Becky. We're going to go back to WJAC TV, our sister station in Johnstown, with more coverage on the crash of the United flight here in Somerset County, as we take a quick look at New York City right there, downtown New York.
Several witnesses, and if we do have that tape now, talk to one of the eyewitnesses that saw that plane go down.
The Hoffman's nursery, getting a plant. Next thing you know, a lady looked up in the sky, and I looked up with her, and just seen the plane coming straight down. I mean, it was just coming straight down, almost like a 45-degree angle, and then you seen a big puff of smoke, a huge puff of smoke. Yeah, that was it, and I got my truck and ran over to this site here.
Now, if you take a look behind me, the scene is down below, and there is some smoke coming out right now. I know it's very difficult to see right now because the FBI has removed us from our initial spot here in Somerset County. We have been moved quite a bit away from the actual accident scene, but there is some smoke coming up, a helicopter in the air. That's the scene right now. We do want to try and get some more information. Again, there is a press conference coming up shortly to get some more information. We're under some tape right now showing some of the scenes that we saw here earlier today. Again, I was able to get in there. They're not letting any press anywhere near this scene right now. And when I went in earlier today, fire departments from all over our area, rescue crews from all over the area here, rushing, trying to get to this scene, trying to sort out what had happened. One thing that I can say, I didn't see any ambulances leave the scene carrying any passengers, carrying any survivors at all. Again, we don't have any confirmation on a number of people on that plane, on what airline that was, and if anyone indeed was killed or survived. Now, we will continue to follow this story throughout the day, and Marty, I just have to say it's one of the toughest things to see that I've ever seen. And of course, we're all going through this today, but to actually be here firsthand and see a crater in the ground and know a plane actually landed in that, it's indescribable, Marty.
John Meyer, it certainly is.
All right, that's our coverage from our sister station in Johnstown, WJAC. I want to thank them for their live coverage and the pictures there of the crash site in Somerset County.
And we just got news from, the Associated Press out of New York that the estimate now for the number of people killed or injured is in the thousands. Not surprising after what we saw this morning. We're going to show you right now a scene of one of the major arteries leading out of Pittsburgh. As you see, very heavy traffic there. That is Route 28. And these are people heading home, heading out of downtown.
We've been hearing that, you know, the voluntary evacuations of several of the large buildings in downtown Pittsburgh, and a lot of people are just, and their bosses as well, allowing them to leave. They're asking, can we go home, be with our families? This is such a troubling time in America, and there's some apprehension about being in a downtown area, given what has happened in New York and in Washington, and the fear that, you know, we're not untouchable here in Pittsburgh, so people are looking to go home, looking to touch base with their loved ones. And a couple of other things to point out here to you. Regarding Major League Baseball, it has postponed in its entire schedule today no Major League Baseball games. And some late information on this flight that crashed in Somerset County, United Flight number 93, a Boeing 757. It left Newark, and if I'm reading this wire correctly, 8:01 a.m., headed for San Francisco with 38 passengers, 2 pilots, 5 flight attendants. That's what the airline is saying, and the flight crashed, again, as we know, near Pittsburgh.
And we know of a second United plane. It was United Flight 175, a Boeing 767. That one left Boston at 8 o'clock this morning, bound for Los Angeles. The aircraft carried 56 passengers, 2 pilots, and 7 flight attendants, according to the airline, and the airline is not saying where that plane crashed.
So we've had 4 planes involved today, the 2 in New York that struck the World Trade Center towers that ran right into the buildings. We had the 1 crash here in western Pennsylvania and the 1 Peggy just mentioned.
And there have been a lot of unanswered questions, and you know, in a time of crisis like this, there is a lot of misinformation, so we're trying to be very careful about what we tell you today. But there has been concern that there may have been other planes hijacked. You know, we're hearing all kinds of things, but again, we are only going to tell you what we're getting confirmed to us.
Right, and there's a lot of speculation how all of this is tied together. Of course, something striking the Pentagon this morning after the attack in New York, that it could possibly all be connected, some type of terrorist mastermind plot of an attack on the United States. That is certainly a possibility. We do not have hard information on that right now.
Some of the stuff that I was listening to this morning, people were asking, you know, asking questions about our intelligence community and how they could not have known that something like this was coming. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of scrutiny of the intelligence community after today.
As you may have heard, there were no threats called in, mailed in, anything. There was no indication there was going to be this attack in New York or in the Pentagon or the other 2 flights that were involved. And you know, people were saying today, well, there's no specific threat to the USX Tower, the Frick Building, the other buildings that are being evacuated as a precaution. There were no specific threats made to the World Trade Center. So certainly a feeling of uneasiness that we all have right now is quite understandable.
And I'm sure there are plenty of people from this Pittsburgh area who today were in New York, or I know somebody who was in Washington for a meeting this morning at the Pentagon. And so that person is all right, by the way, or was all right, was able to contact his wife and was okay. But this story is just going to go on because we're going to have a lot of people from our area affected by this tragedy.
Absolutely. And we have Newland Archinall live downtown again for us. Newland, with the latest there.
Well, just wanted to pick up on what Peggy was saying. We found out in our household that this tragedy has affected us. My husband lost a coworker this morning, was on the plane that struck the Pentagon. So, as you mentioned, it affects everyone. Even though it may not happen here in Pittsburgh, you probably know of someone somewhere. Anyway, as for what is going on here in downtown Pittsburgh, I do have some updated information. Really, don't come downtown. There's no need to. I just found out that Kaufman's, Lord & Taylor's, most of the major retailers are closing early. In fact, I went into Kaufman's, or tried to go into Kaufman's, to find out what was happening. The doors locked at 12 o'clock. All the workers are going to be sent home early today. There's no shopping, which was really sort of disappointing for a lot of the people here who simply can't get out of the city, and we're just trying to kill some time. A lot of folks have been waiting for
head of the Port Authority Police, that would be the organization that is in charge of the World Trade Center building itself, the Port Authority Police chief told us that they were at that point about, I'd say 40 minutes ago, about to make a decision on whether or not it was safe to send emergency workers back in there. But the bottom line is that according to the chief of safety of the New York City Fire Department, he says that he probably lost a great many men in those secondary explosions, and he said that there were literally hundreds, if not thousands of people in those two towers when the explosions took place. He said everything above the 60th floor was extremely difficult to get to, as you can imagine.
Pat Dawson.
Back to you.
Pat Dawson, thanks very much. We have some videotape, I understand, that we're going to show you from the West Bank. These are Palestinian celebrations in the wake of Tuesday's terror attacks in the United States. Apparently, Palestinians took to the street chanting, "God is great." People were throwing candy, distributing candy to passersby. The U.S. government obviously has become increasingly unpopular, particularly in the West Bank and Gaza Strip, because Palestinians feel that the U.S. government has sided with Israel. One man, Nawal Abdel Fattah, wearing a long black dress, threw sweets in the air, saying, actually that's a woman, pardon me, saying she was happy because, quote, America is the head of the snake. America always stands by Israel in its war against us. Meanwhile, Yasser Arafat emerged to speak with reporters, the head of the Palestinian Liberation Organization. He said, "We are completely shocked. It's unbelievable. We completely condemn this very dangerous attack, and I convey my condolences to the American people, to the American president, and to the American administration, not only in my name, but on behalf of the Palestinian people."
And this comes on a day, Katie, in which obviously there's been a steady deterioration of the situation in the Middle East, but Shimon Peres was to meet today with Yasser Arafat in the West Bank. There has been some criticism of the Bush administration for not getting more involved in the peacemaking efforts in the Middle East in the past few weeks from within the Republican Party.
Behind the Empire State Building that you see in the foreground. Those two towers no longer stand after a terrorist attack this morning. NBC's Pat Dawson is close to the scene of that attack. Pat,
Matt,
can you hear me?
if we are, yes, I can, Matt. If there is a war against terrorism that started, rather ongoing right now, it started here at about 8:45 this morning, as you described, a big hole in the skyline at the southern end, the southern tip of Manhattan Island, where the two World Trade Center towers have stood for the last 25 years, 110 stories high. They are no longer there. Just moments ago, I spoke to the chief of safety for the New York City Fire Department, who was obviously one of the first people here on the scene after those two planes were crashed into the side, we assume, of the World Trade Center towers, which used to be behind me over there. Chief Albert Turry told me that he was here just literally 10 or 15 minutes after the events that took place this morning. That is the first crash. He said that at one point he had roughly 10 alarms. That would equate to roughly 200 to 225 New York City firefighters who were in the building. This was after the crash, trying to rescue civilians who were in there. Now, earlier this morning on the Today Show, we spoke to the director of the World Trade Center. He said that at that hour of the morning, you could have upwards of 10,000 people in each of those towers. That would be 20,000 people total in each tower. The chief of safety, as I said, chief safety of the Fire Department of New York City, told me that shortly after 9 o'clock, he had roughly 10 alarms, roughly 200 men in the building trying to effect rescues of some of those civilians who were in there, and that basically he received word of the possibility of a secondary device, that is another bomb going off. He tried to get his men out as quickly as he could, but he said that there was another explosion which took place, and then an hour after the first hit here, with the first crash that took place, he said, there was another explosion that took place in one of the towers here. So obviously, according to his theory, he thinks that there were actually devices that were planted in the building. One of the secondary devices he thinks that took place after the initial impact was, he thinks, may have been on the plane that crashed into one of the towers. The second device he speculates, was probably planted in the building. So that's what we have been told by Albert Turry, who is the chief of safety for the New York City Fire Department. He told me that just moments ago. Now, we are continuing to hear explosions. Here downtown, and what we've been told by some of the fire officials is that there are some gas lines that occasionally are exploding down there, because obviously, as you can imagine, there are a lot of open gas lines down in the southern part of Manhattan where the World Trade Center towers used to be. As far as the situation right here, basically what we have are hundreds of New York City firefighters and other New York City rescue units who are massed here. There is a cordon just down there. We are not sure, to be honest, if some rescue workers have tried to go beyond that point as yet. When we spoke to the